Hello ladies, gentlemen and others, my name is Dan, the voice behind that Kaito Dan, and welcome to my review for RWBY Volume 9, Episode 9, A Tale Involving a Tree. But before we get started, as always, please make sure you have seen this episode first to support the show and the fantastic people behind it. And thanks as always to those of you who have commented on my last review. Suffice to say there was a lot to discuss. And you guys added to the fun with stuff like Neo being a hot topic for obvious reasons, with Cloud 5001 voicing strong thoughts against a redemption for the baddie, while Standing by Life hopes that they can get one, whilst also finding a neat aspect to Roman's dual voice work. And finally, Salvador Garcia chimed in on Little's death, finding the bitter irony to the loss following a stinging jab for one of the most broken by their passing, which was one of many events last time out that made the previous episode certainly one of RWBY's darkest yet gripping chapters. From fan faves returning as villains to painful beatdowns, it was quite the wild ride that ended with multiple faces broken in one way or another, leaving us lot wondering what on earth can come next in the volume's penultimate entry. Thus the question to ask is, was this tale able to keep the highs reaching above the trees, or were there issues in need of rooting out? Let's talk about it, and maybe some small predictions as well of the finale to come. Feels odd not talking about an episode warning or Crunchyroll screwing up. That's scary in of itself. But we actually don't start in Ever After proper. Instead, we go from entering the world somewhat via a symbolic doorway to seeing the iconic tree from the perspective of the beach acre, now as a picture in the book based on Alex's adventures within. All while a familiar voice reads the book's supposed final questions central to the tale, the most prominent being of which, what are you? Well, upon us asking that to the voice, we can now see that it does indeed belong to Summer Rose, who, while not fully visible, at least in the episode itself, we finally see and hear them as a proper character, not a memory or a vision. And we now get confirmation as well that her voice actress is indeed Morgan Laurie, as some of us predicted after they did the volume's opening narration. Morgan, for those who need a reminder, is also known for roles like Rei Todoroki from My Hero Academia, Sol Marin in Black Clover, and Miu Miu in JoJo's Stone Ocean. And I think she's a perfect fit for the role already, emitting the kind of motherly heart that we have come to expect of someone touted so highly as a super mom. We also get the concept art for Summer at the end of the episode, since I doubt we will be able to in the finale of the credits. And firstly, I gotta say right away, Tai Yang, my man, you certainly upgraded in the wife department. Like, I do like Raven, don't get me wrong. Her design is cool, she's a very interesting character, and there's certainly some charm to her personality, despite her questionable decision making. But Summer just looks so sweet and charming, and yet she still looks like a cool huntress. Thankfully a far more unique attire as well than the plain all black version of RWBY's gothic dress that she had before. Funny then that I say this, since you can definitely see where RWBY still gets some of her elements that would inspire her look as well, with the combat skirt, the long hooded cape, and similar colour scheme. And perhaps this may play a factor in future events. By the way, now that we've all got them voiced, and with proper models now, when's our Team Stock content? Back on track, this is a pretty effective opening segment given what the volume is setting up as the closing set piece, especially when it's then followed up by a shot of present day RWBY looking all woody. But before we can get to that, we then see Jean and the remainder of Team RWBY flee from the crumbling Neo mansion, no doubt still shaken up by what happened to their friends, and to some extent maybe even Neo even as well. and Jean especially is trying to wrap his head around so many lives that he knew and cared about being lost, all thanks to this mad world that he still doesn't fully understand after all this time, before they all arrive back at the destroyed Paper Pleasers village. I'll admit, not quite sure why they went back here. Granted, their options of how to get to the tree are basically non-existent, and this place is all they really have to call for a home-based, ruin or not, but it did feel like a sudden trip back with no real explanation, at least until it soon becomes obvious that this is for Jean's much-needed moment of growth and acceptance. Once more, the poor guy is starting to blame himself for failing to protect anyone, but though Weiss offers him a little comfort at first, he gets his biggest source of hope from a new face that takes things a turn for the better, as they're greeted by a little gem person who kindly wishes to help Jean's mood. For they are a genial gem, one of many in fact, who then pop up, a group of Afterans who Jean soon starts to sense a familiarity over, because these lot have also the purpose of catering to the care and well-being of those they met and the world itself, just like the Paper Pleasers that Jean used to protect. After finally being able to pass on into the cycle, the once fragile beings have ascended and returned to this place with a stronger yet still charming form, matching their now more long-lasting effect on the world, as shown by them turning the floodwater into a beautiful crystal fissure, backed by an equally delightful portion from a new song, Quiet, a serene little melody where Casey's vocals and the soft lo-fi notes create a wonderful aura of calm, peace that falls nicely in line as well with giving Jean the lifted sense of enlightening clarity he so desperately needs, where his mind isn't focused on a new problem or his continued grief. Instead, he can witness what's being shown to him so he can understand without distractions where he's gone wrong as of late in order for him to grow. In chasing the thrill of rescuing someone by protecting the Paper Pleasers repeatedly, he had trapped himself in a looping scenario where, true, he was able to find some success as a hero, but it was keeping the Pleasers from becoming what they needed and wanted to be. He was still failing due to his selfishness that allowed his mind to be distracted away from the grief, low confidence, and hurt that still lingered inside him, and pain that he would only be able to heal from by confronting it, something which Weiss does help drive the point home with some more welcome words of support. Jean's always taken losses hard, far more harshly as well than he should when, for a lot of his failures, he still has done great work as a protector, a hero, a friend. By focusing instead though on trying to be the perfect hero, he's not allowing himself to learn from his mistakes, much like any great huntsman that came before him. Something that honestly I imagine he's actually been dealing with even way before any of his major losses. Remember, this is the guy who has had to grow up listening for years about the great legacies that many within the Ark family have built over their lifetimes as huntsmen, and this of course led to quite the high bar that the lad felt he is always going to have to struggle trying to reach. And it's clear even after coming a long way since his green and grass days back at Beacon, he's still weighed heavy by this. Probably because he never heard much of the talk about some of these same people's losses. He's never been able to understand that even the finest make mistakes and they grow from it. In turn, he's never been able to grasp what you do with those mistakes that honestly shapes as much of your legacy and ability to succeed as any of your smooth sailing victories. And it didn't stop any of his family from being seen as great huntsmen, which Weiss also makes clear. Despite his bumps in the road, she still sees him as a good person and hero deep down. This is a long overdue lesson, brilliantly touched on to start the ball rolling again on Jean's longest weakness that has only grown more stagnated with his time in the Ever After. It's been something that has defined his character almost as much as his very failures scarring his heart. That feeling of not being enough to measure up to the idealed, perfected vision of a hero that his upbringing would have him think, resulting in him wanting to prove himself but being faced with so many hurdles, it has blinded him into thinking that he has had to live up without truly understanding the falls are just as important for him to learn as the victories. And this was a very effective way to present that lesson. The Blazers returning as the gems was a great way to show through what Jean used up until now as his crutch, physical proof, both what Jean was entrapping his wounded heart with, and an example of growth through loss, thanks to that personal attachment he had made with the Afterans. And I especially like as well the additional support came from Weiss, who is always at her best when she is being the shoulder to cry on and using her own experiences to help others recover. After all, she too has had issues dealing with living up to high bars and accepting that she won't always be having a perfectly smooth path on her journey, making her words of advice feel truly valid since we know well enough she's speaking with experience and merit. It's not just kind words without her own understanding of what she's trying to tell Jean. It's not the deep or reflective moment between these two that I have wanted for a while now. Still really want these two to reflect on how far they've both come since their less than positive days as a duo back at Beacon, but it is without question a truly heartfelt moment that I still enjoyed, especially the hug at the end, even if I start to take away my loose White Knight shipper glasses. But I guess with all the warm and fuzziness, I should now address the elephant in the room that many have brought up for this opening portion. How the scene does kind of feel jarring given the heavy tone set up at the end of the previous episode. The gang just saw RWBY delete herself in a way right in front of them, but here things are focused more on Jean's problems, with the girls acting more calm and happier than you may expect after such a loss. And yeah, I can't deny, I kind of agree with some of the sentiments to a degree. Jean's attitude I am fine with, he's the right kind of confused and on edge that I feel he should be. But the girls went from being left stunned still in shock to sharing smiles over the gems and jumping into hugs with Jean a bit too soon after one another just happened, creating a bit of a sharp clash of tones, even though I do understand why the girls are acting like this. They at least understand that Ascension isn't as damning as Jean has led to believe. They get that it's meant to be rebirth, not death, so they understand that RWBY isn't really dead, she is just waiting for her rebirth. The issue though is it feels like there was a scene missing between the girls reacting to RWBY's fall and them being more of their usual calmer selves for Jean's needs. Something is missing that helps the three snap out of their shock, realize they need to figure out how to get to the tree ASAP, and then realize that one of their biggest hurdles is Jean still hasn't accepted Ascension for what it truly is, thus they can't reach the tree until he does, and without this scene, it leaves a whole segment feel kind of rushed. Again, I do understand why they are so lighthearted in the scene, it certainly helps comfort Jean when he really needs it, but even I can't deny, the way the scene plays out, it's like we're missing a page, and it's likely a result of the budget shifts around this point in the volume. The crew be wanting to make sure the finale works as well as, hopefully it does, as the volume's final note, and thus that means a longer runtime, more animation and audio work, and so on, requiring more of the budget. This would also mean less of that for this episode, and unfortunately I feel this scene ended up on the receiving end the worst of the downsides for this mindset. It is a shame in that sense, because honestly I feel like the issues here aren't that deep. They just needed refinement. Have one of the girls chime in during their escape from the mansion that they understand they all hurt right now, but they must remember they know from the Pleaser's Ascension that Ascension isn't death. RWBY can come back, thus they shouldn't lose hope so long as they reach the tree. That could then lead them all into understanding Jean's struggles. Embracing the truth of Ascension is going to cause a problem for them, thus they are so willing to help and be comforting for him in his moment of need. Something like one of these two extra lines of dialogue would have helped smooth over these bumps in the tonal interweaving, and I do believe it could have been done even with any of these budget related complications. But at the same time, that's just my rough assumption of what is to blame for this, and I certainly don't blame the RWBY for their decision making, as I feel their hands were probably tied, especially since I do want to stress, despite the jarring vibes, I still really like this scene for what it meant for Jean to get this vastly needed realization moment for both the issues at hand and the lad's series-wide character arc. He does indeed finally come to understand what ascension truly can be for a person in need of growth and rebirth, even agreeing somewhat with Curious's take. And I love that as soon as he has this understanding, the tree immediately starts to call out to him, subtly at first, as the scene pans out and shows a steady build to the final acceptance moment with a bit of soft wind, and then in grand fashion with a giant swell of leaves that instantly whisked the group to the tree. A lovely use of visual storytelling there, leading up to this big progress forward, giving the gang a sign of hope that things can still turn their way. They also soon come across a wooden encased herb, who's still in the midst of awaiting his rebirth, before Yang then finds RWBY in a similar state, sweetly embracing her. This is another scene that I do have a gripe with, though it might be more of the minuscule side than the earlier one. I kinda wish we didn't get that glimpse earlier in the episode of Wood and RWBY alongside the opening stuff with Summer, and instead our first time seeing RWBY's current state was in this moment, making it more of a surprise alongside Yang's reaction. Not a major issue, just a small change I would have made, as I feel it would have been a more emotional moment if this was the case. This does though help buff out a little bit of the issues from the scene previously, showing that at least with Yang, she still was very worried for her sister, especially seeing her go from a relieved gentle hug to desperately trying to break RWBY out, though Jean stops her realizing that they got here because of acceptance, the kind that Jean had for that true intent of ascension, and now they need to share more acceptance, this time for RWBY needing to ascend for the sake of her own happiness, Weiss rightfully stressing that it's RWBY's decision they have to stand by. She did also say that they've done all they could, which is kinda true, kinda not true. They all certainly could have done a lot more, and that's partly their fault as much as it is everything that has got in their way, but what is still important for them now is to be there for RWBY when she comes back and stand by her, even if she has changed drastically, which I think is a decent message for viewers. You certainly can and should be there for those you care about, but you gotta respect the decisions made by them since it is still their life. They should be allowed to, within reason of course, decide to change and grow however they feel so they can be fully content in life, doing so hopefully with confidence that they're gonna be supported along the way. And we also see that Herb breaks free, showing off his new legged form, so the gang can also see another example going along with the genial gems that the process can be beneficial. It's all a matter of the one involved making the choice of their own free will. Which leads us nicely into seeing what exactly is RWBY up to, as we see her awaken in a dark but still somewhat inviting void. Not quite the afterlife, since compared to past times we've been there, this place is a lot more than just a white void, so we're definitely in the middle ground between life and death. And soon RWBY finds she's not alone. The blacksmith is here as well, which gives us our first good look at them, and yep, still a giant metal woman. I'm shocked though they're metallic grey for the most part. I assume based on the intro they would have been more golden, and the fire in the stove last time out certainly made them look like it, but either way, it is still an awesome design. They also look to be busy working on something, a shape similar to that of a facial structure, and I think this is them making the new form for Little. We never see the little critter in this episode, despite knowing that they fell into the tree root's hole just like RWBY, and the metalwork does look similar to a rodent's face, so it's possible that their new form will be bigger and tougher. Funnily enough, making light of Little's little joke back in episode 2 about wanting to belong, and making it an actual possibility now where they are bigger, stronger, and maybe even able to become something like RWBY. I would love to see them take on some traits of RWBY to become a sort of fighter mouse, one who protects their home and anyone else they wish to guide, thus the need for a sturdier form. As a Red Wolf fan, I'd certainly welcome the prospect of Little going from meek but earnest young mouse to a valiant, brave and supportive warrior mouse, much like RWBY or Jean. Maybe even taking over for the Rusted Knight, depending on Jean's fate. Anyway, the blacksmith is surprised to see RWBY sooner than expected. Seems the tree always anticipated an encounter like this, with the blacksmith clearly presented now as their tree's proxy in the final step of ascension, right down to even having some wooden elements in their design, and popping into the scene later on with green wispy winds accompanied by some of the tree's leaves. Regardless, RWBY is here, and she's concerned what comes next. The blacksmith says it all depends on what RWBY wants, but they also understand that RWBY doesn't know what she wants. Props, by the way, by Lindsay's line read of, "Am I gonna die?" They nailed just how fragile RWBY's heart is right now after finally losing what little hope she had remaining, and her will to remain as Ruby Rose is equally as brittle. And the music, by the way, at this point of the episode has damn near been flawless throughout, just to have a little bit of a detour topic. 3 different scenes each carry a different, somber yet mystical flair to the backing tune, with each really fitting perfectly with the tone of the scene at play, reminding me a lot of that one track from the bonding scene in How to Train Your Dragon, or the same kind of atmospheric, magical energy found in some of Spyro 2's world maps. Very great stuff, and it continues throughout as well as the emotions continue to strike a literal high chord. Back in the living world, a loud noise leads the group to find a doorway. Their ticket home is finally within reach, though do note the carvings on the doors. It's the 2 dragon forms of the God Brothers, further confirming again that they were responsible for this play's creation. And this has slightly as well boosted my already high confidence in where I think the exit point's location back in Remnant is gonna be: the Realm of Light. I mentioned it back on Twitter in the past, especially in recent weeks, and you alright made reference to it in a recent video as well, but I really think the gang will end up back in Remnant by popping up in the once shrined location where the God of Light resided before casting this world aside. And it would make sense as well to have it be 2 God-made locations, plus there's the whole life and death aspect. The Ever After tree is the focal point of Ascension, and the pools of water in the God's domain was what Salem fell into when she received her immortality. 2 places, both of which have a notable tree and a connection to the gods, and where lives were changed in drastic ways. Sounds fitting, right? Also, on a smaller aspect, the carvings being the gods' dragon form might also reflect on their forms that they largely took in these realms. It would make sense to take on the form of creatures in the world of fantasy and no human residing there, while in Remnant they would take on more human-like forms with animal traits reflective of humanity and fairness. Some will hear this theory though and ask, well, what about Vacuo? Well, I think it would be a bit too perfect if they arrive already in the one place they need to go, but you could handwave it as the transition basing itself on what the person involved wants most, much like how it's the person's desire for their next life that shapes their new form in Ascension. Plus, I think the Domain of Light is in Vacuo. We know the kingdom is, or at least was, the most densely populated land when it came to dust, and I've long believed that this was cause the Domain of Light was both the place where the most concentrated amount of magic was before the God of Darkness wiped humanity away, and this was the first place as well hit by the fallen moon rocks struck down by the same god as he and his brother left Remnant. Both these elements would then create the tons of dust present here, while also ruining the land in its destruction, turning the once beautiful realm into a resource-depleted desert. What's more, in the E.C. Myers book, Before the Dawn, there's a paragraph where a young son in the Vacuo Desert claims to have seen a tree with glowing golden leaves, much like that of the God of Light's tree. So it's possible while the god's domain was largely destroyed, due to its magical nature and it also still being that link point to the Ever After, it remains as a hard-to-reach oasis of sorts in the same place it's always been, just now surrounded by a dry, barren desert. But anyway, we do indeed have our way back home. However, one person having a bit of trouble with it is Curious, still within Neo's body, but every time they try to walk through the door, it's getting thrown back out like the mangy cat it is, eventually turning their attention to the heroes with his rather awesome hilarious pose, followed up by some catty jabs shared between them and Weiss, who mocks Curious's plans failing, while they in response claim that Weiss was always the worst of the bunch to deal with. Love this back and forth, and I especially love seeing how Curious in Neo's body moves. Sure, while Neo has always been rather physically expressive for a character for obvious reasons, we've never seen them this animated in communication before, at least in my mind, because of the cat's twisted, charismatic yet animalistic nature, causing the once mute girl to emit far more openly with their emotions than before, really selling how unnatural and wrong this whole fused state is. It's gross in the sense that it's someone else controlling Neo's body and going against much of their usual mannerisms, and yet it's also entertaining because it's still really well made stuff, backed by RWBY as ever, killing it with his deliciously evil voice full of malice and showmanship. The cat's block as well does reveal a major aspect of returning home that really makes things interesting. You don't just need a body of someone from Remnant to reach there, bypassing the ascension process, you also need an attachment in that other world that can anchor you there, someone or something that you can live for, and it seems that, yeah, right now, Neo has none of that. At most, she may have the drive to want to get payback on Cinder now, but either that's not enough, or her emptiness when getting revenge on RWBY also sapped this drive away. And this goes back to her biggest problem for so long now. She kept living in the memory of Roman, someone who's no longer here, instead of trying to make new, strong bonds that can help her move on and find new reasons to keep living beyond something she no longer has. Because of this, she not only has lost her own free will, she's lost her best chance of returning home, which certainly doesn't bode well for Neo's odds of making it into future volumes, when the only people that she can now count on to make new bonds are the very people that she's been an enemy for and has personally caused a lot of harm towards. Weiss, Blake and Yang, they would likely reject wanting to help her outright, which then leaves Neo with also only 2 remaining options left that are equally packing low odds of success. Maybe RWBY might do so as an act of mercy, promising to help Neo return home so long as she leaves them alone, maintaining that RWBY's drive of helping those in need if there's still a chance to do some good in her new ascended form, or she might offer a truce if Neo later helps them against Salem and Cinder. This is certainly a possibility, but it's very weak since Neo was the one who tormented RWBY and killed Little. And while RWBY is willing to offer an olive branch even to an enemy, her deep heart can only go so far. Honestly, if Neo is going to be saved by anyone from Curious, much less be able to go back home, it might be thanks to Jean. On the rescue aspect, I think his aura amp might be the key to getting Curious out of Neo, boosting her aura so much that it overrides the cat's soul, forcing it out, which Jean could very well decide to do purely just to stop Curious, not so much save Neo. As for the attachment aspect, there might be an avenue to explain why Jean would do so for Neo based on events set up later on, so I'll save it for then. But for now, while the doors are certainly closing on Neo's chances of returning to Remnant, I wouldn't say they're slammed shut just yet. Though of course that does again depend on if Neo wants to go back. She might instead prefer to stay in the Ever After since, like Roman said last episode, she always wanted a place to run away from what ails her and be free to do what she wants, which she can easily find in this world. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, Curious is one pissed kitty cat, now seeing Neo as a failure, and just like Alex. And they go on to finally reveal the true events involving Alex, the cat, and Lewis upon reaching the tree, where it turns out Alex didn't really trick the cat. They simply had a moment speaking with the tree, much like RWBY is right now, and she came to change her mind about wanting to leave, at least not before first fixing everything she damaged and caused harm to, including Jean. She had a crisis of conscience, as Curious calls it, but a better way to describe it is a change of heart. She culminated her growth during her time in the Ever After from being a spoiled, cruel brat to someone whose selfishness was replaced with kindness and a desire to make right what they did wrong. A shame then that shortly after Lewis had already returned home, likely realizing afterwards that Alex didn't follow, and then they decided to write the fable in memory of her, the cat saw this change in Alex and responded violently, all because he no longer felt that he was able to leave for Remnant because of this, seemingly killing Alex. But this would then mean that Alex would need to ascend into a new form, so the question then is, what did she become? Well, for the longest time, I believed that she would turn into the Jabberwocker, or at least a Jabberwocker in place of the original, reborn as a destructive beast encompassing Alex's previous chaotic nature, but perhaps they also wished to fix things, since the Jabberwocker we've seen before said as such before encountering Neo. However, I've now since come to join those who think instead she became Juniper, since she had a rabbit brooch on her design. And what was it that the Jackalope did beforehand not too long ago? They rescued Jean from the poison. And while this new form of Alex might not remember who she was before and why Jean was poisoned, they probably sought them out first because they felt deep down in their heart they had that desire to fix the mistakes that Alex had made in a past life. And that started with taking Jean to the people who could heal him. Jean unknowingly then grown resentment for both the cat and Alex, not knowing in actuality his old friend is why he's still alive and they've remained by their side all this time. It'd make for a sweet way to close out Jean's time in the Ever After if he's able to learn of this before returning home, but even if he doesn't, I do like the idea of Alex managing to do some good even in a new form, being the friend that she should have been all this time that will go a long way to help Jean himself grow from his time here, so long of course he lives to remember it. We're bound to find out before we depart this place anyway, but the only way that can happen is after the heroes take down this bad cat, who's now sporting some nasty claws and has just spotted their new ticket home in the still encased RWBY, who's still going through their ascension, which I'll return to discussing in full in a bit, and it is very intense stuff, thanks in large part again to some incredible music being played. The sharp string work and bassy drums adds to the energy of this climactic fight with so much on the line. Plus there's some well-placed distorted notes for when Neocat plays some devious mind games that I absolutely love, with a couple of creepy looking RWBY clones really making us feel that sinister vibe to the cat. Love the continued use as well of the cool shadow of the eyes visual detail in Yang's reaction to this. It's honestly been one of my favourite expression quirks played with often this volume. Like right here, this shot alone expresses just how strongly disturbed Yang is, making it all the sweeter then to see her push through the deception and not lose her cool even in retaliation. Notably not even going into a blazing rage mode too, showing more signs that she's keeping herself as stable as she can because of what is at stake. By contrast, later on, Jean is a little more hurt by the cat's lies and deceit, understandable since for the longest time, he did truly believe Alex was the true devious one of their group. And it's here that I wanted to also give a shout out to whoever was in charge of the fighting style shift in Neo while she's overtaken by Curious. We know Neo's trademark approach to combat is misdirection, playing light on her feet, and taking advantage of openings that she creates with her frustrating her foes. It's why she's been so damn hard to hit, much less beat. But now the cat is at the driving wheel, the RWBY have wisely made her fight as Neo in a different way, befitting their strengths and mentality, using more aggressive attacks and being the aggressor, very much fighting like a rabid feline in a human body, though they do still make the most of Neo's incredible agile form with quick dodges and a slick spinning kick attack. But Jean's got some new tricks of his own, as we see he's mixing up his sword and shield play with some melee attacks, with his increased protection giving him some more strength in his kicks, and even I'm sorry, did this lad just catch Neocat at one point by hitting her with a headbutt to the pussycat? I'd say foul play, but honestly, go for a Jean. Well deserved indeed. And sadly, Curious can fight dirty too, halting a kill and blow opportunity by turning into Penny, stalling him just enough for then a Pyrrha copy to come from behind and slice him hard with a beautiful but brutal blow to both Jean's body and his spirit. Yes, while the knight has come to accept his failures, he's not over the trauma of them just yet, and boy does it just hurt to see him once more reminded of his deepest pains in such a cruel, twisted distraction, especially the use of Pyrrha. It's the first time he's seen her living, so to speak, since that fateful night in Beacon, and it's to harm him once more. This also gives the cat the opening they need to drop Jean down, and to add further insult to injury, they dodge an incoming fire blast from Weiss, pulling off the cat smirk in the process, which then hits Jean and sends them flying over the edge, which is the last we see of this fight, leaving Jean's fate unknown until the finale. At least kind of unknown, because there is a small clue in the transition. The smoke we see is just like that of the puffs created during Herb's medicinal therapy sessions, likely created here thanks to the fire that is still on Jean's shield, catching light to the tree's leaves used for that very process, which I think is telling me Jean's about to get some long overdue therapy of his own. About time too, since he had no encounter with Herb in his retelling of his past adventure with Alex. Jean wasn't shown there for whatever reason, meaning that he missed out on this, and I think this is time for him to get that opportunity. And I imagine he'll come face to face with his younger self, who will try to offer him another chance to accept a simpler life, much like the girls got. A life free from misery that he's experienced and all the baggage that he's had to endure in his efforts to become a hero. But just like the girls, and with words of encouragement that he got from Weiss recently, Jean will realize, for as painful as his losses have been, they have helped him grow as a person and as a huntsman. It may even be what helps Jean cast off his rusted knight identity and returns him to his younger self, since he would no longer need to use that persona as a false version of himself. Also, in regards to the Jean aspect in how it might lead to Neo's rescue, Jean may come out of this smoke scene understanding that not only can he excel as a protector despite his failures in the past, he may also come to discover that he and Neo are alike. Two people who have had people dear to them loss and let that pain lead them down a path of loneliness and further grief. So perhaps that's what influences them to not only use their power to free Neo from Curious's clutches, but also talk to them and convince her that she needs to move on from the loss of Roman, like he needs to move on from the loss of Pyrrha and Penny, instead to live for herself and find new bonds. Neo then gaining an attachment that can bring her back home by then needing to owe Jean one for this rescue and advice, leaving the door open then for a potential face turn or a shift into a anti-hero nature down the line. It's the best idea I can come up with to explain how she can get back with the limited options left to her, and one that can help set her up into a future arc where she's not just saved for the sake of keeping a fan favorite around, there's actually some development for the character to be had. Anyway, for the opening rounds of this final fight, it was really good. The flow nicely going on with the cutaways to RWBY side of things did help things keep very active even with the low points of that other scene, and the music was central to that strength as well in how it ebbed and flowed back across the emotional tones with some great animation as well to cap things off, mostly in NeoCat's slick, bestial animations and the heated choreography. No complaints really, outside of wondering where the heck Juniper went to. They go missing once the fighting starts, which sure is probably meant to make it more of a personal battle with just the heroes fighting desperately to protect RWBY, but it was still a detail that I noticed in my re-watches that I was shocked they didn't address. Maybe they're just standing guard by RWBY. And speaking of RWBY, let's focus fully now on her side of things, with the little red growing increasingly more assured she may need to change who she is if she's to right the wrongs made in her life so far. Her self-belief so crippled right now, she's going from venting about never finding the right solution like the heroes in the stories Summer read to her, and that reason for that is herself, that she simply isn't capable of achieving that, so perhaps it is best she fixes that side of her, even if it means losing who she is right now. This then leads into this awesome shot of many weapons encased in RWBY-covered glass spawning around RWBY and the blacksmith, who's offering these items as a means for RWBY to indeed cast off who she is and become a new version of herself, whatever that may be. I may have said this in their last encounter, but I love the symbolism of RWBY needing to decide a course of action that will help her psyche by taking up a weapon, something that she has described in the past as being an extension of the user. What a brilliant way to bring back that early in the series phrase to make it mean so much for RWBY now. RWBY then asks who did these weapons belong to, but the blacksmith stresses that it's not important on who did wield them, it's who could. Any of them might be the symbol of a new life that RWBY can have, so long as she feels she can carry the burdens from them within. Basically saying the right new form will only find RWBY if she truly reaches out to it and accepts it, embracing all of its changes and all the potential struggles there within for that chance of growth. And she just might be ready for it, cause as she continues to vent off some of her woes, she's long kept bottled up by the way, she breaks out of a decreasing depressed state with a reaction of almost clarity, pinpointing one glaring fear that she doesn't feel like she's enough. This is great stuff, cause it's showing RWBY can find her way to what she needs once she finally stops bottling up her fears, pains and so on, and instead confronts them, voices them out in the open so she can start unpacking through all the heavy emotions and finally pinpoint the core issues she's been unable to address the more she keeps hiding away under so much grief, to allow her to get this much needed self-introspection. And having RWBY again gain this small crumb of positive understanding presented in this way is just a fraction of hope that we the viewer need to see that she can rewrite the course on her own. And I love as well that it's only after this moment of understanding that creeps in do we see the tree give RWBY a little nudge in the right direction with the gentle wind, leading her down to the next step, that being once more coming across the axe weapon we saw in the blacksmith's forge, the weapon that we now know is indeed Summer's, based on the concept art and RWBY's response. A little bit odd that she didn't immediately recognize the weapon, which was one of her biggest influences, much less her mother's, but at the same time, she was very young while Summer was still around. It's possible she simply forgot how exactly her mother's weapon looked as she got older, and now she is thinking more about this weapon because it represents the biggest measuring stick RWBY has had for her life, as both what she wants to be as a huntress and as a person. Summer. She reunites with the axe and gains that unlocked memory because this is the weapon that she needs to reach out for if she's to continue down this path to whatever she needs to discover, if she's truly to find the answers she needs to grow into RWBY, the best version of herself. Also, I want the axe to be called Last Rose for the reasons you see on screen here. And this is where the episode ends. One of the cruelest cliffhangers in the series, cause it leaves us with one hero left knocked out of a tough fight for our heroes' lives, and we see here with RWBY that she's just on the cusp of what she needs for her big turning point, and now we have to wait a little bit longer. But since I was going into this episode aware it was short, and was thus likely going to be an half-empty exploration of these climactic final moments for the volume, I was able to take this bloody blow in my stride. And I do think the crewbie left this scene especially on the best note possible, keeping RWBY right on that fine line now with still being deep in a self-defeated attitude, but now finding a small glimmer of light in the darkness, giving us enough hope to savor on until that new episode, while still being on edge for RWBY's well-being heading into this massive moment for a character. And it's bound to be an emotional reunion of sorts with Summer. After all, we do hear her once more before the episode ends, and this is her weapon that RWBY is reaching for. Though I know some have reckoned that this might be setting up RWBY adopting a new identity more intertwined with Summer. People even assuming that she's gonna be basically Summer again. But I don't think that is gonna happen. The way her story has gone, it feels wrong for her to cast off more of herself to basically become Summer 2.0, or a version of RWBY that has major drastic changes to how she looks, acts, and feels. Her story isn't about breaking her down to replace her, it's about breaking her down so she can be built back up again, casting off the pieces that are broken so she can become her best self. And the only way she can do that is by no longer living up to such lofty measuring bars like her mother and the heroes that she has read in her stories. assuming that she needs to be perfect when, much like Jean, she just needs to realize she has to use her failures as avenues for growth. And who better to help her realize that than her mother, the measuring stick, who also hasn't been around to sadly give her daughter the kind of supporting words of advice and comfort that only a mother can. In fact, I think this will be shown by Ruby entering the scene that we saw before of Summer reading to a young Ruby, and the two have a moment of bonding long overdue, ending with Summer telling Ruby to live her life the way she wanted her daughter to do, making the best choices she can, and whenever she does fail, know that she can get through it with the bonds that she has made, because she was Ruby Rose, not Summer, not a legendary hero, just a small, honest soul who is someone's loved one, someone's friend, someone's inspiration, someone's leader. That's all she needs to be, and that's perhaps all she needs to hear before Ruby agrees and is finally able to ascend, not into Summer 2.0 or not even Ruby 2.0, just Ruby Rose, the best she can possibly be. It is going to be an emotional moment, that's for sure, seeing these two divided loved ones come together in Ruby's most dire moment, built up over the course of pretty much every volume thus far, and I really hope they manage to nail that core lesson that feels the best approach to her arc, healing and understanding above all else, with maybe even a newly gained replacement emblem as one last parting gift from mother to daughter. I would feel that would make for a sweet send-off to that scene, and a visual symbol of Ruby regaining her sense of self-identity. Though I will also say I wouldn't be shocked as well if she does have maybe a few other changes to her look that does help cement her growth, like either longer hair showing maturity or some new duds that stands apart from Summer's, so she truly does look like her own person. We'll know soon enough, but that's for next episode. Let's wrap up my thoughts on this one. And yeah, while I do want to stress I understand why the episode is so short and the benefits it should have for the finale, it was a bit of a tricky episode to go through and come out of feeling like I've only got the portion of the meal, not the full plate. The setup for the finale is great stuff, don't get me wrong, and there's still plenty of highlights that allows this chapter to have its own merits. I just can't see where there's visible gaps that hold this chapter back from being on the same strong par as chapters previous, the most obvious victim being that opening segment with the heroes that I already went over with that could have been smoothed out even with its understandable thinning down. I also would have welcomed more scenes of the group showing the pain of Ruby's absence, even with the reasonable explanations saying otherwise, and the early sighting of Wood and Ruby being shown off before that moment with Yang and the others, and the brief moment of her discussing the lost spirits with the blacksmith probably would have been better utilized later on in the episode as part of the wider ascension scene in the latter's case, or just scrapped entirely in favor of the previously mentioned better way to reveal Ruby's status in the case of the former. But those complaints aside, I still really enjoyed this chapter. Jean came out rather strong with his much needed moment of embracing the world in Ascension with a beautiful utilization of a positive experience through the genial gems and Weiss's strong dialogue. I love the emphasis that whatever Ruby's fate is as well, it has to be her choice, and the others need to prove their love and support by standing by her, respecting Ruby in such a deeply personal way, as well as protecting her right now, with a clever linking back to the entertaining fight with Neocat, as well as Ruby's slow dawning of what she needs in the Ascension, helping the strengthening of the core theme of self-acceptance and learning through failure, by having Ruby and Jean's progress develop around each other at the same time. The visuals were also top-notch in both the well-crafted fight choreography, dripping with intensity, and the various settings that matched beauty with effective presence for the themes explored around it. And for me, the MVP of this episode is the music. Hats off to all involved, because whether it was the grand battle track that pumped increased dramatic flair into the nail-biting clash, or the various soft melodies and leitmotif reworks that married the tender, emotionally driven set pieces so well, it all left me gripped as much as the action scenes themselves and all the emotional beats being played out. I was constantly finding myself lost to the music, but in a way that never overtook the dialogue and the animation. It did what any good episode score was meant to do, and that is amplify the emotions being explored through musical audio gold that this episode was packed to the gills with, making it a strong contender, I think, for the best score of the volume so far. And this episode was boasting one of my favorite little details I love too, the many ways that the tree's wind nudges in the right direction and how it was shown off in both weak versions and strong versions as well. Also, a bonus positive, for whatever reason, I just really like the side smile that Blake gave. So now let's close things out with my episode awards, with the scene of the episode going to RWBY's monologues in the weapons circle, the first real instance we see RWBY voice what's on her mind, and it's wonderfully executed visually, audibly, and thematically to get that ball rolling on this long built-up character arc, though shout out as well to the stuff with Jean. Character of the episode? I'm gonna give it to the blacksmith. Sure, Curious is a scene stealer at this point pretty much all the way through, and I adore what we got from both RWBY and Jean so far in only the first half of their major growth points, but I really like seeing this mysterious yet helpful guide finally show off more of their physical characterization, as well as how effective they continue to be as this strange guide that leads RWBY the right way, but is always separated enough to give the control still to RWBY. And also, I'm gonna give the voice acting gold star to the voice of the blacksmith, Kim Lin Tran, since it's not easy to admit alluring appeal and emotion in a very largely stoic character, but they do so remarkably well to allow this still-faced being to have some heart to them. So, in the end, for as incomplete a puzzle as this episode left me to deal with, I did still come out enjoying more of it than I felt that there were elements could have been fixed. Every new piece added is helping me see the full beautiful picture, and as much as I was crushed to learn that I'm gonna have to wait longer for the real meat of the scenes to play out, by no means was I left with nothing to savor. We still got some standout moments for the characters who need as much time as they can to explore their valuable growth still waiting to be unearthed, and the thrills were still there to be had from their emotional progress or some very nervy clashes. And this episode did its job in making me even more excited now for the finale than I was heading into it, whilst still having enough to enjoy right now in the meantime. So while probably the episode with the most smudges dulling the shine for quite a while, this is still a really pleasing final hurdle as we now reach the finish line. I just hope when we get there, we can look back on this chapter and say for all its issues, it was indeed worth it in the end. But those are just my thoughts, with a dash as well of some finale predictions scattered throughout, and now it's time for you to tell me what you felt about this chapter. Did you take the short content well? Were you at odds with how the opening segment played out? Did you think what we did get was enough to enjoy right now? And what are your final pre-finale thoughts before that final page? Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're at it, hit the subscribe and bell buttons and tick the notification box to make sure you get every new video from me as they drop. And follow me on Twitter at @KaitoDan for more on anything to do with RWBY, updates on the channel, and more. But until next time, have a good day or good night, and peace out.